Week 7 is officially on its way, and today I got you guys covered with my biggest trade targets at the wide receiver position. 3 buys, 2 sells. Let's waste no more time. Let's go on to buy number 1, and that is George Pickens, wide receiver of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's quietly played the best football of his career so far, but given the passing volume, given the overall quarterback play, it hasn't really materialized into overall fantasy production. He currently has a 29% seasonal target share and a 47% seasonal air yard share. That ranks among some of the best wide receivers in the game. You know, your Jamar Chases, your CeeDee Lambs, your Justin Jeffersons. In terms of pure volume share in his offense, George Pickens is one of the biggest alphas in the NFL. But unfortunately, like I said, it hasn't really mattered so far given the quarterback play for the Steelers, which we'll touch upon in a second, because we also see that Matt Harmon, from a pure separation standpoint, has confirmed that George Pickens has looked the best he has in his career. I mean, Matt Harmon's charted him every single year of his career, and he has said that George Pickens looks by far the best he has ever seen him play. Now we plug in the other side of the solution, because like I said with Justin Fields, like I said with the Steelers passing offense, wasn't enough to sustain overall production on a week-to-week basis for George Pickens. Again, they were 3rd lowest in passing attempts per game and 5th lowest in passing output per game in terms of yards. Now you enter Russell Wilson. Again, do I think Russell Wilson is going to go out there and be a world beater at quarterback? Absolutely not. But in terms of improving this offense, the value of targets that George Pickens will be seeing, Russell Wilson is a big improvement for his fantasy value than Justin Fields was. Again, Justin Fields, the fantasy asset, better at the quarterback position than Russell Wilson. But in terms of affecting the fantasy value of the piece in the offense, less design touches. And like I said, Russell Wilson, what we do know him in his career, is he the best across the middle of the field? Is he the best in terms of getting through his progressions? Absolutely not. What he is good at is throwing to the boundary to his big X wide receiver, like we saw with DK Metcalf, like we saw with Courtland Sutton in his last 2 spots. I do view that to be the case for George Pickens. So with Pickens, again, I currently have him valued as a mid-range wide receiver 3 at this point. But if you told me 2 weeks' time with Russell Wilson as a starter, this is a guy that we're valuing as a top 20, top 24 wide receiver rest of the season, I can absolutely see that being the case. So with George Pickens, again, you might be able to get him for super cheap price tags, wide receiver 36, wide receiver 38 on your open market, because he hasn't been productive so far. But I do see green pastures ahead. He's my wide receiver 32 rest of the season, and as we'll talk about with some of the sells, there's one name in particular that I would straight up rather have Pickens to. But moving off of Pickens, again, a great buy, we go on to my second buy of the video, and that is Brandon Aiyuk, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers. He's really struggled this year. Like, I don't know what's going on with Brandon Aiyuk. He has 1 game so far with over double-digit PPR points, but we still know the thesis to be the same for Brandon Aiyuk. Yes, is it going to be a little bit volatile because the Niners are so damn stacked on offense? George Kittle, obviously Jordan Mason was playing great. We expect McCaffrey to be back. Obviously Deebo Samuel as well on the outside. Absolutely. Like, I understand this is a low passing volume offense, and I understand that there's other mouths to feed on this offense. However, like I said, the thesis still remains the same, still remains intact for Brandon Aiyuk. This was a superstar level talent, 1,300-yard wide receiver, all-pro wide receiver last year, that simply has not played up to his standards so far. What do I view this as? Is Brandon Aiyuk all of a sudden a worse football player than he was last year when he was the wide receiver 14 in points per game with Christian McCaffrey on the field? I don't think so. I think straight up, he's just been unlucky so far. And like we always say on the channel, when you're in a loaded offensive environment, this is bound to happen on a week-to-week basis. Now, do I think Brandon Aiyuk is going to be as bad as he's been all year? Absolutely fucking not. He is currently the wide receiver 41 in points per game. I think he gets back to the level that we saw going into the year. Again, maybe it's the holdout, maybe it's other things, other factors at hand here. But Brandon Aiyuk, I refuse to say, is as bad as he's put onto the field product so far. And with Brandon Aiyuk, again, George Kittle's on a high right now. I think this is a squeaky wheel gets the grease type of situation. We know Brandon Aiyuk hasn't had the production thus far, but like we saw 2 weeks ago, the talent, the upside is still there for Brandon Aiyuk, and I do think that greener pastures ahead for him. And I'm not saying to go out there and offer a wide receiver 41 price tag for Brandon Aiyuk. Like, that's not going to get it done in your league. What I am saying is that he is still a mid-range wide receiver 2 for me rest of the season, and if the Aiyuk manager in your league is looking at the production, isn't impressed, wants to move off of him, I think you can get him for low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 price tags at this current moment. Again, we still know the San Francisco offense is going to be banging top 5 in implied points each and every week, regardless of matchup. And Brandon Aiyuk, like I said, will have greener days ahead. And it's a common sentiment on this video. Like, if you can buy elite players and great offenses at their lowest value across the year, I think that is when you need to be attacking. And I view Brandon Aiyuk to be that exact case in the San Francisco offense, same as the next case with the Dolphins wide receivers. The thesis remains true for what this offense will look like with Tua Tagovailoa, and in the 1 week we saw this offense functioning with Tua, they were a very good unit, and they were both delivering at their fantasy expectation, especially for Tyreek Hill. Again, I'll gear it more around him. With Tyreek Hill, he has not been the same player in fantasy since Tua Tagovailoa went down. No top 24 weeks, 1 week singularly in the top 30. But what we do know is in the 1 week he played with Tua Tagovailoa, he was the wide receiver 4, 26 PPR points, 62% air yard share, and a 34% target share. Like, the thesis for this guy coming in was that he would be a top 3 overall fantasy asset, and we haven't really seen that materialize with Tua out of the lineup. It's expected that Tua is going to be back in week 8. Again, maybe your league mate doesn't really know that information yet. Maybe you could potentially capitalize on the unknown. If you can get Tyreek Hill for anything less than top 5 overall wide receiver prices moving forward, I would be gearing towards making that purchase. With Tyreek Hill, I mean, can you get Tyreek Hill plus for Amon St. Brown right now? Tyreek Hill plus for Jamar Chase right now? Can you work up from Chris Godwin to get to Tyreek Hill? Maybe you can even do that straight up. That is what I'm saying when I'm talking about buying Tyreek Hill. Capitalize on the overall pessimism of Tua's injury right now, because it does sound like he will be back sooner rather than later. And like I said, I also think that applies to Jalen Waddle. Again, obviously you're not going to be paying wide receiver 5 prices for Jalen Waddle, but he's currently an unusable asset with Huntley in the lineup. And as we know with Jalen Waddle, he is a high-end wide receiver too, anytime Tua Tagovailoa plays. Again, the guy that drafted Jalen Waddle most likely drafted him in combination with a Christian McCaffrey, maybe with an Isaiah Pacheco, maybe with another underperforming 2-3 term player, and is probably in a losing position right now, 1-5, 2-4 in your league, that you can go and get Jalen Waddle because he's concerned about Jalen Waddle's intermediate, not knowing that Tua Tagovailoa will be back. But moving on to the sells, and we got Jameson Williams, wide receiver of the Detroit Lions. I just mentioned Jalen Waddle, by the way. If you can flip Jameson Williams for Waddle right now, I would do that in a heartbeat. Because with Jameson Williams, again, has he been very good both in real life and in fantasy? I'll give him his flowers. He looks great, affects the third level, beating guys deep seemingly every game. But the question I have is, how sustainable is what he's doing right now? Because when we look at his overall usage in the past 3 games, it hasn't been similar to what we saw in the first 2. In the last 3 games, he has posted a 15% target share, a 14% target share, and 11% target share in this Lions offense. Again, like I mentioned with the Niners, like, we know this is going to happen. There's going to be variance because of how many good players are in this team. But when we're looking at the overall volume commanders of this offense, Amon's going to command more volume, Laporta's going to command more volume, and we know those 2 running backs are going to command more volume on a week-to-week basis. The reason why Jameson Williams has been paying off is that in each of the last 2 weeks, he has scored on a long touchdown. So he's currently the wide receiver 24 in fantasy points per game, 14.7 PPR points per game. Can you currently transition him into any of these guys, maybe even with a plus? George Pickens, Tank Dell, Roma Dunze, Josh Downs, all guys I would prefer over Jameson Williams. And maybe you even want to work up with Jameson Williams to see if you can get to a Mike Evans, to see if you can get to a, even like I would prefer Devontae Adams. Can you get up into a top 20 wide receiver using Jameson Williams plus a plus? That's what I'd be looking to do with JMO. But like I said, I view him mostly as like a better version of Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy, low overall target percentage, but we know what he's able to do with his speed, impacting a game on a week-to-week basis. I think Jameson Williams is a better real-life wide receiver than he is as a fantasy asset moving forward. Like I said, wide receiver 36 for me rest of the season. He's currently the wide receiver 24. Gauge what your market value is on JMO if you have him. And then finally, ending off with Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm not saying to sell him for scraps. Again, I don't want people to go in the comments saying, oh my God, you're selling the wide receiver 1 in fantasy for anything that's on the table. That's not what I'm advocating for. I am perfectly content with holding Chris Godwin if I have him, But the reason why he's a sell on this video is that I think Chris Godwin at this point can get you up to any other fantasy football wide receiver if you're choosing. Can you get up to CeeDee Lamb right now, for example? CeeDee Lamb been a little bit disappointing on his bye week. Like I said all video, maybe that team's 1-5, 2-4, can't withstand a CeeDee Lamb bye week. Can you add on to Chris Godwin to get up to CeeDee Lamb? Because as good as he's been, again, he's the wide receiver 1 right now, scoring over 20 PPR points per game. He's a guy I want on my team, but I have him currently ranked as more of a low-end wide receiver 1 rest of the season. And at this point, given his production, especially if you're in a more casual league that looks at the past production, you can flip him into any wide receiver of your choosing. Or maybe you have Chris Godwin, you drafted him as your wide receiver 3. Your top 2 wide receivers are CeeDee Lamb and Malik Neighbors. Can you then transition Chris Godwin into a Breece Hall, a Bijan Robinson, a hammer running back? That is what we're talking about when we sell Chris Godwin. We're not saying, trade him for DK Metcalf straight up or trade him for Devontae Adams straight up. What we're saying is, can you work up to any other wide receiver in fantasy given how good he's been? But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. Comment your biggest trade question. I'll try to get to as many as possible. And of course, I've referenced my rankings all video. If you guys want access to our weekly rankings manifesto moving forward, there is one of 2 ways to access it right now. First way, Underdog Fantasy, promo code FSC. If you sign up and first deposit at least $10, make 1 play on the site, you will get access to our full rankings moving forward, the best resource for your 2024 fantasy leagues. The other way is by going over to flockfantasy.com. Using promo code FSC will get you 30% off any site-wide package, as well as a 7-day free trial on the site. Don't miss out, like I said, the most necessary resource for your fantasy football seasons moving forward. But with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.